Okay, ladies and gents, so the emergency services have been informed that there's been an incident. It won't surprise you to know that normally when these occur, it's on level crossings that are way out in the country. So this could be miles, potentially, from the nearest major roadway. But the first the emergency services arrived on scene, the police are here. He'll carry out a preliminary recce to see exactly what's involved in the incident. You can see we've clearly got a significant number of people trapped inside that rail carriage. Clearly that is also on fire. So there's the first of the incident, and then we have a number of casualties who are trapped inside the car itself. First ambulance arrives on scene now, and they'll perform what's known as triage. So they will make their way addressing each casualty as they do and determining whether that casualty initially is alive or dead, and then the nature of the severity of their injuries, and that will dictate how quickly they are recovered from the scene. Because as you can imagine, in incidents like the Great Heck incident, which wasn't that far from here, in excess of 300 casualties involved. So tremendous numbers of people spread over a very wide area in a very remote part of the county. So the team's arriving on scene now. The first officer in charge from the Fire and Rescue Service has also arrived, and he'll liaise with the ambulance, with the paramedics and with the police officer, and they'll start to put together their plan of action of how they're going to resolve the incident. Clearly significant attention has to be given to the fire itself. That will be extinguished first to ensure that we are, as far as possible, got a position of safety. And of course, stabilisation is really important wherever possible. What we've got to make sure is that the vehicle, and if possible the train, don't move at all now whilst we're performing the rescue activity. So you can see fire service now starting to set up. They're working on the vehicle at the far end, which has a number of casualties trapped inside it. The triage has taken place, and the paramedics are assessing the condition of the casualties and deciding who will be brought out first, and working with the fire officer they'll determine the best way that can be done. Again, really important about maintaining the airway, stopping any breathing. Clearly anybody who requires resuscitation may have that done inside the vehicle if necessary, if they can't be recovered quickly. So whilst that's going on, we can see paramedics at this end under the watchful gaze of the ambulance sector commander being actually conveyed towards the train itself. Now they'll make their way onto that train, and they'll start to determine how many casualties there are and what their condition is. One of the things that many people don't realise is how high a train is. So it will not be possible potentially just to walk up onto it or to lower casualties down from it. So a ladder's being put up at the back so they can form a safe means for access and egress. So clearly Network Rail have been informed of this incident at the very beginning when that signalman took that call from the member of the public. They've now dispatched their team down to the scene, so they will be en route, and once they arrive they will work with the emergency services to assist with the process. As with the house fire incident that we saw earlier, the fire service will be sending a number of specialist officers on scene, officers who specialise in extrication techniques, officers who specialise in command and control of rail type incidents. And Station Manager Harrison will be attending today on behalf of Scunthorpe Service. Clearly, with incidents of the nature and size of this, what's really important is that all the emergency services work together. So in this initial phase, the fire service take control while the rescue is taking place. And what they will bring on is one of their command support units, such as the one that you look behind yourselves, the red vehicle you can see behind you, that's the command unit from South Yorkshire. But that would be brought on scene, and that would control the operations. And what would happen is the officer in charges of all the respective services would go into that vehicle to make their plan and then determine the strategy as the incident unfolds. So you can see at the far end now where the car with the casualties in, the firefighters are working now to determine how best to rescue those people. They've got the hydraulic cutting equipment out. You'll have heard it referred to as the jaws of life, the large cutters, and they'll determine the best way of recovering the casualties from that vehicle. Very often that's by actually removing the roof of the vehicle itself and then literally unfolding and spreading the vehicle with hydraulic rams. All the time, further emergency service operators arriving on scene, lives responders, more members of the ambulance services and the heart team. So we've now got a coordinated rescue activity from all the emergency services. You can see the rescue platform being put into place as we talked about, which will enable the casualties who can walk to vacate the vehicle as safely as is possible. And it will also enable stretchers to be brought in and out as and when required. Of course, one of the significant things with these types of incidents is actually then transporting casualties to hospital. Clearly, as we've said, very often this happens right out in the country, and so very often the emergency services will call in the medical helicopter. So the rescue helicopter will come in. That will either be one of the medical helicopters or indeed the RX search and rescue team, and they will come down. So I'll now pass you across to Network Rail, who have arrived on scene, and they will take you through the incident from their perspective.
So you'll see already there's a rail incident officer arrived on site. He's employed by Network Rail, and that is initiating a structured company response by requesting attendance of an operational manager to act as that rail incident officer. Now, when he first arrived on site, he'll have spoken to the controlling signaller. He'll have ensured that all of the train movements have stopped. He'll provide any additional site protection, and then he'll report all his initial findings to Network Rail Control. The Rail Incident Officer will be liaising with the Fire Incident Officer and all other emergency services on site. The primary role of the Rail Incident Officer is to maintain and preserve any perishable evidence which may be of vital use for a later investigation. Network Rail will have already notified the Rail Accident Investigation Branch of any significant accident, who may send investigators to site.
So, as we said, ladies and gentlemen, you can see the crews working together now to recover the casualties. And one of the really important things with this type of incident is keeping the casualties together, all in the same place. Certainly at Great Heck there was a tendency for casualties to wander off, and that makes life really difficult then in terms of assessing who is alive, who is dead. But when you get the relatives ringing up and starting to question, where's my husband, where's my wife? So it's keeping the casualties together in one place, not only for medical terms, but also I'm making sure that they don't become further casualties by becoming injured in other areas of the operations. So the crews are being brought out at the moment. Everybody with minor injuries will be released as soon as is possible from the vehicle. The fire's been extinguished, and whilst that's going on, simultaneously the rescue operations in the car are taking place. So the roof of that vehicle will be removed, as we discussed. They'll cut through what we call the A, B and C posts. Those are the posts around the window at the front, middle and back. That roof will then be taken away, and we can then assess the extent of the entrapment, so we can see how badly those individuals are trapped, and the officer in charge will then determine how best to rescue them. The key with these types of incidents, because they are so large, and of course in real life go on for such extended periods of time, and to give you an idea, at Great Heck, that incident, the initial rescue phase took about 8 hours, but then it went on in its entirety for about 5 days. So the real key is communication between the different services, and this is why the three emergency services and organisations such as Network Rail spend so much time training together, working together, practicing for exactly this type of situation. Now, for those of you who saw the house fire earlier, you'll see the firefighters are bringing in now what's called a positive pressure ventilation fan. So that literally is just like a big fan that you might see at home or in your office at work, and they'll put that into the train and blow all the smoke out of it, because it's really important to clear the area as far as is possible for anybody who remains trapped inside. Because potentially, just as we've got people trapped in the motor vehicle at the far end, we'll have people trapped in the seats and the seat frames inside the train itself, and they would of course then require extrication. Clearly you can see what we've got in front of us today is a perfect type scenario, in so much as that train is on its wheels, still on the tracks. But it won't surprise you to know that at most of these incident types, often a significant number of carriages actually leave the railway, go down embankments, end up on the side, and indeed often on top of each other, which makes all the rescue all the more challenging, and of course the injuries all the more significant. Quite interestingly today you can see this incident is being filmed by a helicam in the skies above us. That's a new piece of technology used by the filming industry, obviously, to recreate or to capture shots that they want to. But it's also a piece of equipment that the emergency services are looking at more now. Because as you can imagine, for ourselves, if this were spread over a significant number of metres, kilometres even, the advantage of having something like that working in the sky above us, beaming pictures directly back to the command unit behind us, would prove absolutely invaluable to the officer in charges as they make their decisions around the rescue.
You'll see the rail incident officer, Network Rail, still on site. He's continuing to gather that vital evidence, some of which could be perishable. So whilst the rescue phase continues, he also continues standalone gathering that evidence. Behind the scenes, Network Rail Control will already be mobilising the resources needed in preparation for the later recovery phase, which may include recovery and track engineers. Network Rail will also be managing the bigger network to deal with services directly affected in the immediate area. This will also minimise the effect an incident has on other services. Network Rail will be in contact with the media to try to give a clear and accurate picture of the incident and its effect for the travelling public.
As we discussed earlier, ladies and gents, then there's now a rescue extrication going on inside the carriage. So crews are inside there with a second set of hydraulic equipment, and although you can't see it, they're currently cutting away the seats inside there, freeing that casualty, and because of the nature of the injuries, they will now go onto a spine board and then ultimately onto a stretcher and be recovered from the carriage, which obviously makes it all the more challenging. Each carriage contains about 60 persons when it's full, so you can imagine it makes working inside extremely difficult. Whilst that's ongoing, the rescue extrication at the far end is working simultaneously. You can see the crews with the jaws of life, cutting the vehicle away, exposing the casualties to the fresh air, and ultimately allowing them to make that rescue. So whilst the crews are working, I'm going to pass you across to one of the representatives of Network Rail, who's going to talk to you a little bit about rail crossings, the difficulties they pose, and actions we as members of the public should take into account when crossing.
From Network Rail's perspective, level crossing is one of the highest risks associated to railways. Over types of automated farm crossings to foot crossings. Where it's possible, we'll try and close level crossings, but you can appreciate that this isn't always the easy way out. So when we can, we'll try and make regular upgrades to level crossings, improvements using new technologies where we can, and where possible, just make them as safe as can be. I think looking at this scenario that we've got here today, I think it makes people appreciate the worst case scenario and what can go wrong on a level crossing. From Network Rail's perspective, we've come along here, we've got a stand just the other side of where we are here now, just to talk to you about safe use of level crossings. So when you get a moment, if you want to come over, and we'll certainly quite happily talk to you all about what we're trying to do and what we're trying to achieve. Thank you.
So as we discussed, ladies and gents, the casualties have now all been cleared from the carriageway. That PPV fan that we talked about is pressurising the cab. So you can see the final bits of smoke being forced out at the front end there. So that will totally clear the cab of any toxic fumes, and crews can ensure that everybody's been rescued. It won't surprise you to know that in incident types such as this, a number of the casualties unfortunately are thrown out of the train and out of the cars. So what they'll do is a full scene assessment. They'll go for perhaps 100 metres either side of that train and at either end as well, just making sure that no casualties have been thrown down the embankment or into bushes, etc. So the train incident as such is now resolved, and we can move our attentions across to the car. You can see cuts have been made with the hydraulic rescue equipment that we talked about, and this now is no different to any other vehicle type incident that we attend each and every day on the roads of Humberside. It's probably worth reflecting on the fact at this moment in time that for each and every one of us in this arena today, the point at which we are at most risk is the point we put the ignition key into the vehicle of our car. Clearly, incidents of this type involving vehicles and trains are comparatively infrequent. I say comparatively, but we will still average at least one a month of this incident type. But literally each and every day on the roads of Humberside, we attend incidents involving motor vehicles which have crashed with the occupants trapped inside. And it won't surprise you to know common themes: drink and drugs, use of mobile phones, speeding, inattention, all the usual suspects. But the outcomes in a matter of seconds can be absolutely devastating. Families torn apart for a moment's inattention. And this is where it's important. Use of seat belts, use of child restraint seats, really crucially important, so we don't end up having to perform this type of rescue. But there we are, the roof of the vehicle has been removed, and that now allows the paramedics to come in, assess the casualties who are still trapped inside, and they will now work with the fire and rescue service to determine how the rescue is going to take place. And at this point, the officer in charge of the fire and rescue service now hands over to the officer in charge of the paramedic service. So although we will continue with the rescue, it will be under his or her direction, because we've now moved to what's known as the medical phase. So the required cutting have now been removed from the vehicle, and it's now about getting the casualties out without preventing any further serious injuries. Normally that will involve the use of a collar, which you can see the individual in the front of the car has already had applied, but then the use of a spinal board, because of course it's generally the back, neck and then the upper legs which take most of the significant trauma from an incident of this type. So very often a spinal board will be put down the back of the casualty, they will then be lifted up onto that, strapped to it, and then and only then will they then be removed from the vehicle. And then they'll be transferred, of course, either to the ambulance or to the air ambulance helicopter, depending which has been called into the scene. So you can see now casualties who are well and with minor injuries in one area, and they're being given minor treatment and basically just kept warm and well by an individual from the medical services, while the more seriously injured casualty, who was actually brought out of the train itself, receives significant attention, from the paramedics in front of me here, the heart team and their colleagues working together with the air ambulance to keep that casualty alive in enough time to get them moved across to a place of definitive medical care. You can see what they've done here is strapped an automatic device onto that casualty, which is applying CPR. So we've probably all seen on the television where people pump down on the chests of casualties whose hearts have stopped breathing. But here an automatic device has been deployed, and that will allow that activity to carry on for a fairly significant period of time. So whilst that's ongoing with the medical services in front of us here, we can see the other casualty now being removed from the vehicle and recovered. And of course, at this point, the investigation work starts. And that's not about prosecuting people, that's about understanding how and why the accident happened, so hopefully moving forward we can prevent any reoccurrence. And you've often seen unmanned rail incidents where you get a network where the significant incidents occur on a regular basis, where perhaps more barriers will be deployed, or even it will be turned into a manned level crossing if it's of that nature. So the rail incident officer now working with Network Rail, with the police, with the fire and rescue service will start that investigative procedure to ascertain exactly what caused this incident whilst the rescue is ongoing, because a lot of useful information can be gleaned at a very, very early stage of the incident. So that casualty has now been recovered on the spinal board from the vehicle. They'll now be strapped to that, usually taken across to the air ambulance and then conveyed to the hospital. And of course a road journey from here might take 25-30 minutes to reach Hull Royal Infirmary. If they can get them into the helicopter, it's 7 minutes away. So you can see a huge period of time saved there. So you can see, ladies and gents, now the final casualty who is still alive has been removed from that vehicle. Very sadly, the casualty in the back of the vehicle has succumbed to their injuries, as so often happens at these types of incidents. So they'll be left in situ pending the investigation. So the casualties that can be recovered have now been recovered. They're in the hands of the medical services and they're receiving the treatment they need. So that concludes this demonstration, ladies and gentlemen, and that was a really good example of all the emergency services and our partner organisations coming together to work together to keep you, as members of the community, safe. So if I could ask you to put your hands together for the various agencies today.